So the other day I was doom scrolling on Instagram, as I am prone to do, when this haunting image stopped me dead in my tracks. Look at these two drain pipes. Same hydraulic function, basically stopping water from ruining your day, and yet one was made to look like it belongs in a fairy tale. An unhinged fever dream of bourgeois excess. And look at the other one. This latter one looks like it was designed during a sad Soviet supply chain collapse. What you're looking at here is essentially the before and after photos of civilization's aesthetic lobotomy. And it's not just drainage pipes. Everywhere you look, where once there was beauty, now there's a dearth of it. How did we get here? Is beauty a human need, or is it a frivolous bourgeois obsession?
Millionen Menschen sind
obdachlos.
The first of Britain's skyscrapers.
The box was a fascist symbol.
$5 million for a banana.
Den Nazis ist diese Architektur ein Dorn.
And how did everything become so ugly? So to understand how we got here, we have to discuss one of the greatest architectural crimes that happened in the 20th century. And it happened right here in New York City. In 1910, New York had a train station that made European cathedrals look insecure. Imagine walking through bronze gates, 3 stories high, under a ceiling inspired by the baths of Caracalla, with sunlight flooding through steel and glass arches soaring 150 feet overhead. Coal miners and secretaries and immigrant families all got to feel like they were in an ancient Rome for the price of a train ticket. Then in 1963, in an act of cultural desecration that ISIS would consider excessive, they demolished it. Why? Because a bunch of guys realized they could stack a very mediocre sports arena on top of it and make more money. The new Penn Station? The basement with a bunch of escalators. It is just as alienating and as boring as a parking garage.
This is what we got instead.
As art historian Vincent Scully perfectly summed it up, through Pennsylvania Station, one once entered the city like a god. One scuttles in now like a rat.
It's so demoralizing every time I end up in Penn Station. What's so perplexing about this is not its uniqueness per se.
To be clear, this systemic destruction of the city's architectural heritage is not unique to New York. You'll go to Europe, for instance, to Germany, and you'll see that same before and after effect where entire swaths of the urban landscape are destroyed and something ugly comes in their place. But Germany had a war. They had a reason for this systemic destruction. Nothing like that happened in New York.
They were dismantled by choice. And so the question is, why?
Well, one of the most common explanations you'll hear is some variation of it's capitalism. Right? They'll say, capitalism is what happened in the 20th century, and that's, we have to build things more cost effectively, and that's why we build ugly buildings, because ugly buildings are cheaper. I never bought that argument, and I'll tell you why. Because humans didn't invent greed in the 20th century. As long as humans existed for maybe 250,000 years, there were always humans who wanted to build things cheaper and more cost effectively and cut corners to maximize profit. This is not some 20th century invention. You could say capitalism just did it better or at scale. Well, if that's true, you know what's more cost effective than, saving a few dollars on ornamentation on the facade of a building? Plumbing. You could cut corners and just eliminate plumbing. Who needs plumbing?
Once you put this pipe in, you can forget about it. It's watertight, gas-tight, and root-proof.
Root-proof?
Underground roots, like these right here.
And you could say, well, it's entirely different because you could live without beauty, but you can't live without plumbing. But that's not true. Humans, for most of their history, built houses, built buildings without plumbing. What changed in the 20th century? For thousands of years, we just went into the backyard, did the doo-doo, and called it a day. And now we don't because we don't tolerate it anymore. Right? There are building codes and regulations that we voted for and enforce plumbing. And so the plot twist isn't that they stopped building beautiful buildings because they're greedy. They stopped building them because we stopped demanding them. It's not a supply side problem. It's a demand side problem. And so the question is, why? Why did we stop demanding them? Because that's the more interesting question, and that's the one that's a little more complicated to answer.
Well, I was just going to say that after all, I don't know anything about pipes or wires.
That's just the point.
But the first thing company always notices is how the floors look.
The ancient world conceived of beauty as an objective reality embedded in mathematical proportion. For Plato, beautiful objects served as earthly reminders of perfect forms, while Aristotle saw beauty's mathematical order as reflecting the inherent structure of the cosmos itself.
The golden ratio. The golden section and the divine proportion is a simple mathematical relationship that is found in nature. It has been used in works of art, ancient structures. Golden ratio is seen in humans too. The whole body adheres to this ratio in some form, that it is prevalent in all aspects of the visible universe, from a nautilus shell to the arms of a vast spiral galaxy, from the petals of a rose to the spiral of a hurricane. The Parthenon in Greece, Taj Mahal, and Notre Dame Cathedral, the Great Pyramid in Egypt, also features the golden ratio, clearly showing that humans have been using this ratio for important uses for thousands of years.
The Enlightenment and subsequent modernist movements dramatically challenged classical beauty's mathematical certainty. Immanuel Kant's critique of judgment recentered aesthetic judgment within subjective experience, while claiming universality, basically creating a philosophical foundation for beauty's shift inward. Rather than existing in external and fixed mathematical relationships, beauty now became located in the subjective experience of the perceiver. Or, in other words, beauty was now in the eye of the beholder. This subjective turn accelerated through modernism. The story goes like this. First, the Impressionists broke with academic realism. Fair enough, Monet's water lilies still look like something a human would willingly have in their home. Then Picasso and the Cubists fractured reality. Abstract expressionism's emphasis on emotional response still takes skill, still interesting to look at.
Alors, qu'est-ce qu'on fait? Eh bien, on en fait un autre, non? À moins que tu sois fatigué. Fatigué, ça me plaît. Et continuer toute la nuit, si tu veux.
But by the mid-century, as artists deliberately violated classical proportions and harmonies, collectively dismantled beauty's mathematical foundations. Beauty became less about proportion and more about expression, less about harmony and more about disruption.
Introducing the artist, William Green, a student of the Royal College of Art, and his style, action painting. You'll notice that for this school of painting, one needs a bicycle, preferably one with flat tires. By the way, William, who does this work in his spare time, is following in the footsteps of an American, James Pollock, who developed action painting 10 years ago, when he accidentally spilt a pot of paint on his canvas, and liked it.
The art world gradually replaced the question, does this take skill to make, with, does this come with a theory paper? Suddenly, technical ability was considered embarrassing, almost vulgar. Anyone still trying to paint beautiful landscapes or realistic portraits was dismissed as provincial, kitsch, or the ultimate insult in art circles, commercial. Our story's villain era actually begins in 1908 Vienna, where an architect named Adolf Loos, which, with a name like that, it was kind of inevitable that he would turn into a historical protagonist, or a villain, if you will, published an essay called Ornament is Crime. Not genocide is crime, not child trafficking is crime, but ornament. This man looked at the accumulated artistic achievements of human civilization and said, 9. Adolf Loos argued that decorative elements were literally primitive and degenerate, like something a criminal would enjoy. It wasn't just some random Viennese incel with manifestos. This became architectural orthodoxy.
In the Paris studio flat he built for himself in 1933.
Enter Le Corbusier.
I speak so bad English that I am...
This is a man who wanted to bulldoze most of central Paris, a city that survived literal Nazi occupation, and replace it with concrete cruciform towers. The big idea was that ideal apartments should be modeled on a monk's cell.
Frankfurt is a city of contrasts. Modern thoroughfares ran side by side with ancient streets where historic buildings still stand in picturesque confusion.
You had the Bauhaus school in Germany, which declared that form follows function, unless that function is making humans feel joy or not wanting to kill yourself.
With 20th century Frankfurt, Utility has replaced tradition. Architecture is modern in every sense, from the great factories to the municipal
The
dwellings.
whole movement became known as the International Style, which is a fancy way of saying it doesn't matter what culture you're in.
Major developments in structural design and new methods of fabrication and construction have made concrete a material of unlimited architectural forms and shapes.
Or what climate you're building for.
Over to Finsbury for a last look at houses no one will miss when the planners of a new London give the order, pull 'em down. These were the 12-story blocks of flats at G Street, Finsbury, the first of Britain's skyscrapers.
They invented what can only be described as architectural anhedonia, ability to experience pleasure from looking at your surroundings. Everything should look like it was designed by someone whose aesthetic references are limited to Soviet prison architecture. It turns out we stopped building beautiful things not for economic or practical reasons like they tell us. We stopped building beautiful things for philosophical reasons. Once we determined that beauty was subjective, not objective, it meant there was no true assessment criteria. How do you enforce building codes that say something has to be beautiful? Imagine you're the building inspector, inspecting a building to determine whether it's up to code. You can determine whether there's plumbing or not because plumbing is an objective truth. There's either a plumbing or there isn't, right? It's a yes or no question. Same with heat insulation or any other thing that we determine is objectively discoverable. But beauty is now subjective. Once we determine as a society philosophically that beauty is unknowable, that beauty is personal, we could no longer enforce beauty standards. There was no longer assessment criteria by which to determine whether a building is beautiful or not, whether a dress is beautiful or not, whether anything was beautiful or not. It now became a matter of taste. Well, I have great news for you, because for the first time in human history, we're finally able to lay that question to rest. Through the scientific method and through data that we've been able to gather and synthesize in the past few years, we're able to finally answer the question, is beauty subjective or objective? Is beauty biologically ingrained in us, or is it rather a cultural construct? Is beauty in the eye of the beholder, or is it something more universal? And we finally have the answers. Recent neuroscience from the University of Texas has discovered that being surrounded by these modernist sort of structures is literally damaging our brains. When subjects look at traditional architecture with natural patterns and ornamental details, their brains produce alpha waves associated with calm and well-being, the same patterns observed during meditation, for instance. When they look at modernist structures, their brains show activity patterns similar to what happens during fight or flight responses, the same activation seen when viewing threats. The neurobiology here is undeniable. We have specialized cells in our visual cortex specifically evolved to detect and process natural patterns. Traditional architecture mimics these patterns. Modernist architecture actively avoids them. Eye tracking studies reveal the problem. When looking at traditional buildings, our eyes simply move in relaxed scanning patterns as they follow ornamental details. With modernist and postmodernist buildings, the problem is our eyes dart around searching for visual anchors and finding none create a state of perceptual confusion. More recent research from the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture shows that people in traditional environments report 27% higher life satisfaction, 18% lower stress levels, and significantly better cognitive function on memory and attention to tasks. But one thing we now know for sure, beauty is not frivolous, it is not a bourgeois indulgence, it is not a luxury, but rather it's a neurological necessity. Everywhere you look now, there are green shoots of progress. There's the traditional architectural revival led by people like Quinlan Terry in Britain and Dimitri Poriforios, who design buildings that don't look like they belong in a dystopian movie. In Richmond, Virginia, there's a classical architectural school now producing graduates who can actually draw by hand. Even urban planners are getting in on the counter-revolution. The King's Foundation in Britain is building entire neighborhoods with traditional designs.
And welcome to Poundbury. This is the town that Charles helped to build. And take a look, these buildings, they all look hundreds of years old, but actually this was a development built over the last 30 years. It's all about using design and architecture to change the way people live. It is about sustainability. It's also mixing the traditional with the modern, and that is exactly the kind of king that Charles wants to be.
This architectural revival of traditional architectural styles is springing up all over Europe and North America. After thousands of years of discourse and hypotheses, we finally could arrive at some form of synthesis of all that to come to a conclusion on beauty. And it turns out beauty is both biologically innate in us and also a cultural construct. It is both. The real question isn't whether beauty is objective or subjective, but why we convinced ourselves we could live without it in the first place.